Hi guys, it's me, Kari, and I was about to read you some more Dicey's song, but Venus decided she wanted to visit with us, so don't mind. Vivi wants to say hi. Say hi to the camera. Say hi. Look, look, look. Princess, look. Say hi. Are you so pretty? Are you so pretty? I know your little feet slide on the table, huh? Oh, thank you. Are you gonna move? Are you gonna move? Don't show everybody your butthole. God, Venus. My daughter is nothing if not classy. Classy, sassy, and a little smart assy, huh? Oh, I love you. Thank you for being in the video. Are we done? Oh, you're going to give Mama kisses? Well, that's pretty cool. Mama going to push this back. And then we can read while you give her kisses, because Mommy likes kisses. You give the best smoochies ever. We're going to start chapter 7 now, okay? You can't lick the book. You can lick Mama's hand. You can't lick the book. Okay, here we go, guys. Dicey looked out the window and made her legs stay still. Outside, wind blew the branches of the 2 big oaks, ripping off the last of the brown leaves and carrying them away. The sky was a bright blue, and the sun shone with a diamond hardness. The brightness of the sun and the coldness of the wind combined to mark out sharply the edges of her view. She could see each individual brick on the old building, as if the cold made each brick contract into itself. The angles of the main entranceway, the clear edge of the cement sidewalk, and the flat lawn were bare and brown now, all looking as if they would be cold to the touch. I love you so much. You're the best little girl. Dicey crossed her ankles again, containing her impatience. She was wearing jeans and one of the rough old boy sweaters, a bright red one that hung loose about her torso. Venus! Venus! I love my cat. I love my cat. Oh my gosh. She had chosen it because it seemed like the kind of color her mama's brother Bullet would have liked, if she was right about the kind of person he had been. Mr. Chappelle, thank you, baby. I love you. I love you. You're a good girl. Mr. Chappelle was putting off returning their papers until he had told them about the mistakes most of them had made. They were supposed to be writing these things down, the list of misspelled words, the grammar errors, the kind of topic sentence every paragraph was supposed to have. He was explaining and explaining. Everybody was quiet, just waiting for him to get finished. The thing that got Dicey was that he pretended he was doing this stuff first because it was more important than the grades. That was what he had said, that the papers were a learning situation and the grades didn't matter. But Dicey suspected, thank you, Princess, that he was doing this dull stuff first because he knew that once he handed the papers back, nobody would pay any attention to him. It wasn't his fault. I love you too. It was just the way classes went. You worked hard, or not so hard, for something, and when you got the results, that job was over. The teacher might not think it was over, but the students sure did. The grade told you how well you had done or what you got away with. Venus! The grade was what you looked for, not the red circles around mistakes. Sometimes a teacher wrote a comment, good work, or bad work, and you looked at that too. But mostly, everything they had to say they said in the grade. If there was something more important than the grade, Dicey wanted to know why teachers didn't ever say anything about that, like write you a note about it on your paper. If it wasn't worth his time to write down, how could he say it was worth hers? She sat forward and sat back and sat forward. She looked at the clock. Only 15 minutes left. He'd have to hand the papers back soon. Now, Mr. Chappelle said, you may be interested in seeing your essays. He smiled at his own joke, so a few kids made little fake laughing noises. Before I hand them out, there are 2 I'd like to read aloud to you. Dicey made herself lean back in her chair. She jammed her hands down into her pockets and stretched her legs out in front of her. To share with you, Mr. Chappelle said, and reached down into his briefcase. He took out a pile of papers. Then he ran his hands through his red hair and looked around at everyone, his eyes sliding along the rows. He tried another joke. Both of these essays were written by girls, but I don't want you boys to get discouraged. Everyone knows boys grow up more slowly. Okay, sorry, phone call. Who cares? Dicey demanded silently. He took up a paper and began to read. There's a girl I know. You never know what she's thinking, even though everybody thinks they know this girl. You look at her face, but that doesn't tell you anything. Sometimes you don't know what's going on inside. Sometimes you're not sure you don't know. I wonder about this girl. Here's what I've noticed. Dicey thought this girl could be just about anyone, even Dicey. She could tell by the way the rest of the class was listening that they had the same feeling. The way it was written, it was just like somebody talking. She's about the laughingest person you're liable to meet, if you live forever. Nothing but sets her off laughing. You could tell her you were flunking every course and about to be booted out of home and into the unemployment lines, and she'd laugh. She'd laugh until you might start laughing too. You could tell her you just got elected president of your class and captain of the football team and Prince Charming all at once, and you know what she'd do? She'd laugh. Everywhere she goes, it's nothing but laugh, laugh, until you feel like you're caught out in a rainstorm that won't ever end. But I keep finding her crying when she thinks nobody's there to see. I catch her, and when I ask her, honey, why are you crying so bad? She never says one word to tell me. I stand there passing out the Kleenex, and she's whooping and wailing, and there's nothing you can stop her once she's started. By this time, Dicey thought she recognized who the person was describing, Mina, because of the laughing. The crying wasn't anything Dicey had seen, but she guessed this was a pretty close friend of Mina's. Another thing, she's always talking about you. Not behind your back, but right when you're having your conversation. How are you? And what do you think? And what do you like? She's mighty easy to talk with, this girl, because she's always interested in the other person. She listens and she remembers, and she'll ask you 2 years later, remember that fight you had with your father about your allowance? Do you still feel the same way? I guess she's about the most unselfish person I know, but inside she's always thinking about herself, patting herself on the back for being a caring, remembering person. She's got about the longest arms you'll ever see for patting herself on the back. So while you're telling her this sad, beautiful love story, and you're saying everything you feel, but everything, she's listening so hard you feel like she's curled up inside your own head, and you think there was never such a person for listening to you. All the time, part of her's wondering if she's ever been in love, or if she ever will be, and how it'll be for her. And she's thinking how great you think she is. This girl is just about something, and I sometimes wonder if even she knows what's going on. But Dicey thought the only person who could know all that about Mina was Mina. Dicey sat forward in her chair. Was it Mina's paper? She slipped her eye over to where Mina was sitting. The smooth brown cheeks looked as if they'd never heard this before. Mina was looking down at her open notebook, but she wasn't smiling the way the rest of the class was while they listened. The way Dicey started to smile, figuring out what Mina had done. Dicey was impressed by this paper, the way Mina wrote about herself. Boy, was that an idea. That was an idea and a half. To see her, she's got all the answers. Everybody else has trouble making up their minds. Should I do this? Do I want to wear that? Is this the right answer? Not this girl. She just knows the heart out of everything and everybody. She doesn't hesitate. She just puts her big feet out in front of her and gets going. And worried? That's a word this girl never heard of. It's not in her dictionary. She knows from north to south, and she knows which way she wants to go. No regrets, not for her. If she makes a mistake, well, she's made a mistake, and so what? Confident, you'd call her. And for all you know, you're 100% right. There wasn't anybody since the Garden of Eden as confident. But I've seen her do her hair one way, then brush it out and do it another. I've seen her sit in one chair, and then in another, and then move to a bench, and finally sit on the ground until she hopped up to sit in the chair she tried first. I've seen her rip up 10 starts of homework papers, and only hand one in because she ran out of time to rip it up. By this time, the class had figured out that it was Mina the essay was about. They whispered it and looked at Mina. They wondered, interrupting Mr. Chappelle, but he didn't seem to mind. He seemed to want them to guess who'd written it. They asked one another, did you? And answered, no, not me, did you? Mina just kept staring down, but she was having a hard time not laughing out loud. Dicey was sure Mina had written it about herself, but she didn't know why she was so sure. She just knew it. And all the time this girl's listening and laughing, all the same. I'm watching her and I don't know what she's thinking. And then I'm thinking, maybe I do. I guess by now you know who I'm talking about. You know it's me, Wilhelmina Smiths. The class burst out laughing and praised Mina. Mina looked around and pretended to take a bow. Mr. Chappelle told her to stand up, and she did. And as she caught Dicey's eye. Dicey pursed her lips into a mute whistle to try to say how impressed she was. Mr. Chappelle stepped forward and gave Mina her paper. Mina didn't even unfold it to see the grade. She just sat down again. Now, for a horse of another color, Mr. Chappelle announced. He began to read. At the first words, Dicey recognized it as hers. She stared at Mr. Chappelle's pale, impassive face as he read about Mama. Mrs. Liza lived way up north, away up out on Cape Cod, away in a town right at the edge of the Cape. Her cabin was outside of town, right at the edge of the ocean. The ocean rolled up toward her rickety cabin like it wanted to swallow it up, but it never did. Maybe it didn't even want to. The wind was always blowing around the cabin like it too wanted to have that little building gone. Mrs. Liza had children, but she had never been married, and the man who was her children's father had long ago gone and left her. She worked nights when the children were little, waiting tables in a restaurant, serving drinks in a bar, night clerking in a motel. She always worked hard and was always willing to take the days nobody else wanted. Christmas and 4th of July, Easter. When the children got older, she switched to a daytime job, check out in a supermarket. She hadn't had any training for the kind of job that paid well, so she was always thinking about money, hoping she would have enough. Every sweater she owned had holes in it. She had reasons to turn into a mean woman, but Mrs. Liza just couldn't. She had a face made to smile, and her eyes always smiled with her mouth. She had long hair the color of warm honey in the winter, the color of evening sunlight in the summer. She walked easy, high narrow shoulders, but loose, as if the joints of her body never got quite put together. She walked like a song sung without accompaniment. Then slowly, so slowly she never really could find out the place where it began, life turned sour on Mrs. Liza. People said things. While she never heard them herself, her children heard them, and got older, and understood what people meant. Mrs. Liza loved her children, so that worried her. Money worried at her the way waves worry at the shoreline, always nibbling away at the soft sand. Her money seemed to run out earlier each week. Mrs. Liza stood at the door of her cabin and looked out at the ocean. The ocean looked back at Mrs. Liza and rolled on toward her. She could see no end to the ocean. The wind that pulled at her hair was always blowing. She looked out at her children playing on the beach and reminded herself to get some tuna fish for supper, but she forgot. Her eyes stopped smiling first, and then her mouth. The holes in her sweaters got bigger. Meanwhile, people talked, and she didn't know what to say so they could understand. Meanwhile, quarters and dimes got lighter, smaller. Meanwhile, her children were growing bigger, and they needed more food, more clothes. Meanwhile, nothing she did seemed to make any difference. So Mrs. Liza did about the only thing left to do. She went away to the farthest place she could find. They cut her hair short. She didn't notice that lying there, nor when they fed her or changed the sheets. Her eyes never moved, as if what she was looking at was so far away small that if she looked off for a second, it would be gone. Mr. Chappelle put the paper down and looked up. Dicey felt proud. It was just about as good as she'd thought it was. It was really good, but everybody was absolutely quiet. Didn't they think it was good too? She waited nervously. Maybe she just liked it because it was hers, the way you liked anything you had made yourself. Maybe Mr. Chappelle read it because it was so bad, to show the difference between hers and Mina's. Still nobody spoke. Mr. Chappelle was staring down at the paper. He was wearing a green tie. Dicey didn't care if nobody liked it but her. She remembered how she felt writing it down. It was hard, and she kept scratching out sentences and beginning again. Yet it kind of came out almost without her thinking of it, almost as if it had been written already inside her head, and she just had to find the door to open to let it out. She'd never felt that way about schoolwork before, and she wondered if she could do it again. She made her face quiet, not to show what she was thinking. At last, Mina broke the silence. "That surely is a horse of another color," she said. There was laughter in her voice. "I guess it about beat me around the track before I even left the starting gate." She looked around the class. "Oh, yes, it's very well written," Mr. Chappelle agreed. Dicey kept quiet. "But who wrote it?" somebody asked. A boy. "And what happened at the end? It sounded like she died, but it didn't say she died." The voices went on talking. "It sounded like she was about to die." "No, she was already dead." "Where was she?" "In jail? In a hospital? It said they fed her and changed the sheets." "But what happened?" "She couldn't support her family. She was poor, couldn't you tell? And it just got her down." "But she started out happy, didn't she? Why didn't she get married?" "Maybe he didn't want to get married." "The guy walked out, weren't you listening? Maybe he didn't want all those kids. But it takes two, you know what I mean? It wasn't just her fault." "It wasn't fair what happened to her." "Fair? What difference does fair make?" "Did she go crazy? I would." "And it's a mental hospital at the end? But it sounded like a jail picture at the end." "Who wrote it, Mr. Chappelle? Tell us. You're the one who knows." They stopped for his answer. "I do." "And I don't," he said. Dicey bit her lip. Now what did that mean? "It's like one of the stories in our book," somebody said. What do you mean? Mr. Chappelle asked quickly. Did you read it on our text? How could she have? Dicey thought impatiently. No, I mean, it doesn't sound like one of us wrote it. It doesn't sound like anything I could write. I never knew anybody like Mrs. Liza. And even if I did, I couldn't say it like that. Tell us, did you write it? Mr. Chappelle came around to the front of the desk. He leaned back against it, half sitting on it. No, I didn't. Dicey Tillerman did. Stand up, Dicey. Dicey stood up. She stood up straight and didn't even lean her hand on her desk. Everybody stared at her. I should have guessed, Mina said. She smiled across the room at Dicey, congratulating. What did happen to her at the end? Somebody asked, but Mr. Chappelle cut off the question. Do you have anything to say? He asked Dicey. She kept her mouth shut and her face closed off. She knew now what he was thinking. No, but I'm afraid I do. I'm very much afraid I have a great deal to say. I'm not one of your great brains, but I've taught this course long enough to be able to tell the kind of work students can do. Dicey felt frozen. He wasn't looking at her, but she was looking at him, at his pale, flabby mouth out of which words marched slowly. Now, I can't say what book this came out of, if it came out of a book. I can't even say for sure that it did come out of a book. Maybe somebody else helped Dicey write it. He gave her time to say something there, but he didn't look at her. Dicey didn't say a word. In the first place, her tongue felt like it was frozen solid and her head was a block of ice, and all the blood in her body had chilled and congealed. In the second place, he had more to say. She could guess what that was. But even if I can't prove plagiarism, I can still smell it. Besides, there was a restriction on this assignment. It was supposed to be about someone you knew, a real person. On those grounds alone, this essay fails. Dicey should have known. She should have known this would happen and everyone would believe him. The silence in the room told her what everyone was thinking. She was the only one standing up for everyone to look at. What I primarily resent is the deceitfulness of it, the cheap trickery, the lies, Mr. Chappelle declared. That's not true. Dicey turned to see who had spoken. She thought she could hear her neck bones cracking like ice when she turned her head. Mina was standing up. She looked around the room, her eyes dark as coffee, and puzzled. How can you believe that? She demanded of Mr. Chappelle. Come now, Wilhelmina, he said. I don't believe it, she declared. Her voice sounded certain. Mr. Chappelle looked around the classroom. Dicey could have laughed. He didn't quite dare order Mina to sit down because people listened to her and liked her. Dicey wouldn't do that, Mina went on. She doesn't care enough about what we think to cheat on something. How did Mina know that? Dicey wondered. She wondered it deep behind her icy face. Someone like Dicey, she's too smart to worry about her grades. She doesn't have to worry. If she cared what we thought, her hand sketched a circle including all the students. She'd act different, don't you think? People rustled in their seats. They could think whatever they wanted. Now Dicey understood the C+ in English. The bell rang, ending class, but Mina spoke before anybody could move to leave. Stay here, I'll prove it. How can you prove it? Mr. Chappelle asked. He had moved back behind his desk. I've got these essays to hand out. Wait, Mina said. They could stay or go for all Dicey cared. I can prove it, Mina repeated. Dicey? She looked across the room at Dicey. Her eyes were filled with sympathy. Dicey didn't need anybody's pity. But behind the liquid darkness of Mina's eyes, Dicey saw mischief. Mina knew she was right and she was enjoying herself. Dicey, is this someone you know? Yes, Dicey said. She was talking just to Mina. Did you write it yourself? Yes, Dicey said. What does that prove? Mr. Chappelle muttered. Do you want to hear Dicey lie? Mina asked him. Dicey, is this someone you're related to? Dicey lifted her chin. She didn't answer. There was no way anybody could make her answer. In her mind, she made a picture. The little boat. She'd have painted it white by then, or maybe yellow. It was out on the bay beyond Graham's dock, and the wind pulled at the sails. Dicey could feel the smooth tiller under her hand. She could feel the way the wooden hull flowed through the water. Dicey, Mina asked with no expression in her voice, what are you thinking about? About sailing, Dicey answered. About a boat and how it feels when you're sailing it. Those might be the last words she spoke in that class, and why should she bother to make them a lie? Then people did get up and go. They didn't look at Dicey, but they looked at Mr. Chappelle as they walked past his desk and picked up their papers. Dicey was almost at the door when he stopped her and gave the paper to her. I'm sorry, he said. I'll change the grade to an A+, and I'll change the mid-semester grade too, of course. Dicey didn't say anything. She didn't care what he said. It's my mistake, and I'm really very sorry, he said again. I'll give you an A for the marking period, of course. It didn't make any difference to Dicey what he said. She sat through horrible home ec without any trouble at all. On the outside, she was paring carrots and slicing them thin to boil them at the stoves. She didn't eat any, just scraped them into the garbage. She went to work without even noticing if Jeff was outside playing his guitar. She did her work hard and fast and answered Millie's questions without thinking. She rode home through a wind like a knife blade, but it didn't make her cold. She put her bike in the barn and leaned her free hand against the boat for a minute before going on into the house. Graham was in the kitchen. Maybeth and James worked in the living room by the fire. Dicey put her books up in her bedroom and then came back downstairs. She peeled some potatoes for Graham, then cut them into chunks for hash browns. Sammy came through, rubbing his hands and puffing out cold air. Dicey stood at the wooden countertop, slicing the potatoes first, then cutting across the slices, then cutting again perpendicularly, slice after slice. Graham was shaking chicken pieces in a brown paper bag. Dicey could hear the sound it made, like somebody brushing out a rhythm on drums. How was school today? Graham asked. Fine, Dicey said. She cut slowly and carefully, making her squares as even as possible. How is Millie? Graham asked. There was a kind of sharpness in her voice and alertness, but Dicey didn't turn around to read the expression on her face. She heard the chicken pieces shaking and flour, salt, and pepper. Fine. Graham was staring at her. She could feel it. You never said, Graham said without breaking the rhythm of the shaking, if you got your English grade changed. Well, Dicey said, then she couldn't think of how to finish the sentence. Well, was it a mistake? Were you right? Dicey picked up the last potato. She cut it into neat slices. She laid the slices down flat in front of her. Yeah, it was a mistake. Boy, was it a mistake. She felt pretty calm again, cold and still. What happened? Graham asked. For a second, Dicey was irritated. It wasn't like Graham to insist on a subject Dicey didn't want to talk about. Usually Graham understood and stopped asking questions. We had an essay to write, Dicey explained. She felt like she was talking to the potato because that was what she looked at. Behind her, Graham moved around the kitchen getting things ready. A character sketch about a real person in conflict. I wrote one, and I thought it was pretty good. He handed them back today. He thought I copied mine, or something. He thought the person wasn't real. He thought I'd taken it out of a book. Ooh, yikes. She slowed her hands down. When she was finished with this potato, what was she going to do about what to look at? Graham's voice came from behind her. It must have been pretty good, if he thought it came out of a book. Dicey turned around. Graham was looking at her. Yeah, Dicey said, hearing how fierce her own voice sounded. It was. What did you tell him? Graham asked. Dicey shook her head. You mean he thinks you cheated? She shook her head again. Exactly what happened? Graham asked, sounding ready to get angry. He read a couple of papers out loud to everyone. Mine was one. Then he said he thought I'd cheated because he couldn't, but he couldn't prove it. But he said I hadn't done the assignment because it was supposed to be a real person, so he was flunking it. In front of the whole class? Graham demanded. Yeah. Graham's mouth moved and her eyes burned. That made Dicey feel warm, down deep in her stomach. Graham was angry for Dicey's sake. Can I read it? Graham asked. Sure. Now? Okay. Will you go get it, girl? I've got fat eating. So Dicey went upstairs to get her essay. She started the potatoes while Graham sat at the table and read. She placed the cubes of potato neatly in the hot bacon fat and turned the gas down to medium when she heard the fat start to sizzle under the layer of potatoes. She checked the lard in the other frying pan to see if it was smoking hot yet. She got down a jar of tomatoes that Graham had put up that summer. Every now and then she glanced over to see what Graham was doing. Graham read the essay through once, and then again, and then again. Well, Graham said at last, I can see why he thought it came out of a book. I like it, Dicey. I like it very much. Your poor mama. He couldn't know she was real. It is hard to believe. Are you going to tell him? Dicey shook her head. Anyway, he knows, she told Graham. He said he'll change the grade, as if that mattered, and on the report card, too. Tell me what happened, Dicey, Graham said. Well, there's this girl in our class. We worked together on a science project, and she's about the most popular girl, I guess. Mina. He was yelling at me for cheating, and she said she didn't believe it. As she recalled it, Dicey saw the picture she and Mina must have made and started to smile. I was standing up. I was the only one. And then she stood up, too, and she's tall and strong-looking, and her voice. I don't know how to tell you. Like an actress. Graham nodded, listening. She said she didn't think I'd cheat or lie because I didn't care enough about what people thought. Well, she's right. Dicey grinned now. Then she said she could prove it, so she asked me a couple of questions. She ought to be a lawyer, really. The bell rang and she told everybody to stay put, and they did. Anyway, she proved it, I guess, because before I left, he told me about the grades and said he was sorry. Graham was laughing. I wish I'd been there, she said. I wish I'd seen this. I like the sound of this girl. She your friend? No, not really. No, not really. Huh, Graham said, getting up from the table and going to the stove. She started putting pieces of chicken into the fat. Dicey stepped back. Must have been hard on you, though, Graham remarked. It doesn't matter, Dicey said. Then Graham started laughing again. That teacher sure has his hands full, doesn't he, between you and this Mina character. I bet he was sorry the day he assigned that essay. And Dicey joined in now that she could see the scene as it was part of a movie. Serves him right, Graham added. And will you put these tomatoes into a saucepan? When James read her essay about Mama, he was impressed. He didn't say so, but Dicey could tell. He asked her why she had left things out, about what their house was like, or Mama losing her job. He asked why she hadn't told about Mama's kids more. That's not the way it really was, he protested. It is, but it's what it felt like. But there was a whole lot more, wasn't there? Yes, Dicey agreed. She thought Graham might bring up the subject of Mr. Chappelle's accusation, but Graham just sat there, knitting away on the start of Sammy's blue sweater. She had finished Maybeth's and then dampened it down and laid it on towels in the dining room table block to block it into shape. When it dried, Maybeth could wear it. James went up to bed and Dicey started to follow him, but Graham asked her to stay a while. I've got some reading to do, Dicey protested. It won't be long, Graham said. Sit down, girl. Dicey sat down cross-legged in front of the fire. Graham sat in an armchair a little farther back from the flames. She was knitting the ribbing, purl 2, knit 2. Her quick hands moved the yarn back and forth over the needles. Her eyes were dark, and her hair, at the end of the day, curled around her head as if nobody had combed it. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Graham began. I don't believe it, Dicey answered. Graham looked up briefly at her and smiled. Well, I do, and I was there, she said. After my husband died, I had a lot of time for thinking, and then you all arrived. And if you think that hasn't added things to think about, you're not as smart as I take you for. But especially after he died and I was alone. She looked up sharply to say, Don't think I minded being alone. I don't, Dicey said, the smile she kept from her face showing in her voice and eyes. Good. I didn't mind being alone, and I don't mind you living here, but that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say I married John, and that wasn't a mistake. But the way we stayed married, the way we lived, there were lots of mistakes. He was a stiff and proud man, John, a hard man. Dicey nodded because Graham had said this once before. All right, we're going to stop there, guys, because it just feels like a good spot. I've been reading for quite a while. This is one of my favorite segments of the book, actually. I find Dicey's essay to just be remarkably beautifully written and so sensitive and so just like you just feel like I don't know, as an empath, like I could just totally get into her brain when she wrote that. And I love the way Mina had her back. I think that's really cool. So that's one of my favorite parts of this book. But anyway, I hope you guys are still continuing to enjoy it. We are more than halfway through now, which is pretty cool. But anyway, thanks so much for listening and watching, and I will be back soon with more stuff. Bye.